Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to part 2 of my review of Squid Game Season 1. Say, didn't I have longer hair last time we spoke? Anywho, let's not tarry and dive right in. As cool as the show's intro sequence is, I will say, and this is like a tiny nitpick, but every title sequence, without fail, there's this cinema sins metal clang sound effect. It's not needed, and it takes me right out of the hype for each episode. Episode 4 is when the prison drama vibes really start to ramp up, except that the guards can't do jack and won't do jack. This is another episode of character development, but it's still a decent one. Undoubtedly, the best part for me was the free-for-all night attack, owing to the unique way it was lit. The effective lighting has an in-story reason for being that way, so complimenting it makes me feel kind of uncomfortable, knowing that my sinful appreciation for this sequence matches up with those who are funding this whole operation ramps up the horror even more. Worse still, this special game isn't established to the contestants as being a part of the games that they have to play. The guards know it as such, but the contestants probably see it as being the inevitable outcome of hundreds of people dying for the chance to win that big glowing incentive that dangles above their heads every night. The height of fascination for me was the continued factionalization of the group. Gender is initially identified as being a key factor in determining who will survive the tug-of-war game, which comes into conflict with the equality elements that the organizers are so interested in upholding. As is illustrated in the episode, though, wit, strategy, and tactics can win the day. I appreciated that this was something the episode acknowledged, showcasing certain characters' biases and assumptions when it comes to gender. Thinking about the games generally, gender doesn't really play a big role in swaying who wins or who loses. It's more about the experience of those characters playing those games, topped with a dash of luck. Sadly, this episode isn't without a few issues. I wasn't too impressed with the tug-of-war drop shots, which felt very rushed and unnecessary. I was also astounded that two characters were able to have sex in a toilet cubicle in this facility. At first, I assumed the bathrooms were gender segregated, but I think I made this assumption based on the fact that the stalls were painted pink. And I've seen my fair share of urinals installed within gender-neutral toilets in Korea. I guess that means there's nothing that really can stop this sort of thing from happening. Also, absolute props for filming the pair's dialogue entirely in one take here. I also take issue with the ending of this episode being a cliffhanger. It's not hard to guess the outcome of a match between literally all the main characters and a bunch of NPCs. This is another very nitpicky problem, but would it have made any difference extending the episode by like 2 or 3 minutes? It just feels like a very Netflixy trick to keep people's eyes glued to the screens for longer. If you can convince people to start watching the next episode, they're more likely to sit through the entire thing instead of, say, washing the car or cleaning the dishes. The problem is that if I stopped watching right at the end of the episode, I'm not going to be wondering about its repercussions. This is generally what makes for a good cliffhanger, in my opinion, like the cliffhanger at the end of the following episode. If anything, I'm just going to watch the first 3 minutes of and then turn it off. The Korean cooking show Hukbaek Yorisa, also known as Culinary Class Wars, does this at the end of every single episode. It's infuriating. They leave the outcome of a judge's decision until the next episode. This means whenever I take a break from that show, I'm always coming back to it like 3 minutes in, instead of just starting the episode from the very beginning. Anyway, episode 5 for the most part has the contestants taking a backseat so that the ongoing organ harvesting narrative can play out. It's a shame because the tug of war was the first game that the players were directly responsible for killing each other, and we don't really get to see how the characters feel about that. Only that annoying religious character seems to have anything to say about it.
Only God can judge me. Only God can judge me.
The others are more concerned about preparing in case another night attack happens. With everything that's happened, it might be fair to assume that they've all become numb to the experience now that their emotions are being repressed to prioritize their survival. It was interesting to learn about Gi-hoon's circumstances and how he came to be the lovable loser of the series. Having been laid off by an unnamed car part manufacturer and losing a colleague to boot, you really get this sense that he's a victim of bad luck and timing, and that was what puts him in this situation. Capitalism be like that. Onto the main event though, we get to experience the sheer depravity that the guards are capable of. They detail the unspeakable acts they committed on a female contestant before harvesting her kidneys, making the audience speculate further on how somebody becomes a masked man in pink. I, for one, wonder if they are North Korean soldiers or something. The best part of all was how we saw snippets of the organ harvesting from the surgeon's point of view. This character had to suffer in silence and submit to the will of the guards, working hard for money which he won't even see a penny of. In exchange, he gets little paper clues to the games hidden within his food. This begs the question, how the hell do you put a piece of paper into an egg without the shell cracking? Personally, I really liked Chad Life's response to this query over on Reddit. Junho later gets roped into this situation, and the tension was at absolute boiling point when he started asking the wrong questions. The surgeon's incredible outburst saves Junho from an awkward explanation or two. Even the prospect of him having to do some diving, something I presume he has never ever had to do, ramped up the tension further. Everything exploded with this fight between the surgeon and the guards, highlighting just how effective the stunt crew and fight choreographers were on this show. The fight is so damn sloppy. Them slipping on what must be a very bloody floor and tripping over each other. It's not stylish, it's grim, and it's realistic, and it's awesome. From Junho's discoveries, we learn not only that Junho's brother won the 2015 games, but that the games have been going on since 1988. How many thousands of people have died on this island? As exciting as these discoveries were, I was irked a little by how easily Junho was able to find all this stuff. I get he's a detective and all, but considering the maze-like nature of the facility, I'm surprised he didn't once get lost or get caught or experience any real repercussions for being this odd-behaving guard. Reading up on the show, I found out that Junho wasn't a character in the original movie-length script of Squid Game, which is fairly unsurprising, all things considered. All of this led to the contestants getting rounded up, and we then expected trouble for them all at the beginning of... Though I think the weight of the cliffhanger may be deflated somewhat. I got the impression that the contestants were awoken and held at gunpoint not only because of the discovery of the organ harvesting operation, but also the fact that one of the guards was left unaccounted for. This latter aspect is shelved in favor of shoveling the contestants to the next game, whilst also getting a good look at what happens to those who break the rules of the facility.
이곳에서 가장 중요한 걸 망쳐놨어. 평등이야. 이 게임 안에선 모두가 평등해. 참가자들 모두가 같은 조건에서 공평하게 경쟁하지. 바깥 세상에서 불평등과 차별에 시달려온 사람들에게 평등하게 싸워서 이길 수 있는 마지막 기회를 주는 거야.
Clearly, the frontman is sympathetic towards the contestants, and having this bold vision behind it makes the whole enterprise appear almost noble. As the series progresses, however, we find that these games cannot even be remotely described as noble. Aside from Junho attempting to call the police and then calling the emergency line for ambulances and fires, the entire episode is taken up by the fourth game, where, like the previous game, a 50% culling happens. Well, actually, it's less than 50% because Minyo doesn't get involved. How this episode was able to accumulate so much intensity from such simplicity was astounding. It's such an emotional roller coaster, and the piano piece that's written for this episode was absolute fire. The use of close-ups on the characters was very important to get the emotional element of this episode right. Though I will admit there is a certain level of predictability to this scenario. Those that were focused on in the episode Hell would naturally survive. except for those that are directly pitted against each other. I also thought it was kind of funny that the countdown timer on the wall didn't match up with reality. The 30-minute timer should really have been a 40-minute timer if we're counting how much time there is between when it starts on screen and when the episode ends. Fortunately, the difference is fairly negligible, and considering the multiple pairings and the use of slow motion, it's not something I'm going to get too wound up about. With the sense of caring that Gi-hun gave to Il-nam throughout the series, this is what makes the pair the emotional centerpiece of this episode.
우리 집이 분명히 이 골목에 있는데 씨발 진짜 제발 정신 좀 차리라고요.
The level of frustration Gi-hun must be experiencing here, being pitted against the character you're most fond of and being unable to play a game that requires willpower on the part of both players, fills up the scene with emotional tension.
당신이 여기 거기 있어서 어차피 죽을 거라 상관없을지 모르겠지만 난 꼭 여기서 살아서 나가야 돼. 난 살아서 나가야 된다고. 소리 지르지 마. 정신 차리라고요. 정신 차리고 내 말 좀 들으라고.
Both the survival instinct and guilt collide in Gi-hun's heart, and that idea is performed to perfection in this episode. Like, an elderly family member of mine was manipulated financially by somebody who took advantage of his Alzheimer's. Like, it happens. The difference is Gi-hun has a gun held to his head, and it makes his behavior like more forgivable as a result, which is precisely what Il-nam does. Bringing the Gangbu idea back and basically letting Gi-hun win. I loved it. I actually can't remember if I cried watching this episode for the first time 3 years ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people did. Alongside this were the two girls, Se-byuk and Ji-young, who, owing to their poverty-stricken upbringings in the north and the south, weren't exactly playing with marbles in the streets as kids. Instead of playing a game of some kind, they sit around and shoot the breeze. The thought that Ji-young was just alone the whole time until the tug-of-war game, and then choosing to die because she literally has nobody waiting for her outside the games, was super sad. This might have been the closest Se-byuk has ever had to having a friend. They share a nihilistic attitude from their experiences of diabolical hardships in the outside world. This is also the first time we actually see some real emotion from Jun Ho-young, which was awesome too. The real villain of this episode, Sang-woo, like, goddamn, everything was set against Ali. He's not fluent in Korean, he doesn't know all the children's games. Like, he was taken advantage of as an immigrant in Korea and is now being taken advantage of once again by the local rich kid. Manipulated by this elaborate, overly complicated plan to get other players' marbles. The game was rigged from the start. I also loved the criminal Doksu's minion finally growing a spine, leveling the playing field for the two and then subsequently being defeated. We also see the married couple being pitted against each other and the husband unaliving himself in the following episode. This show can be absolutely miserable, can't it? And I love it. And that concludes part 2 of this review. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on part 3 of this review series, where I will be giving my final assessment of the show. There will also be some bonus videos I'll be making over the next couple of weeks or so, including speculation on the contents and quality of Season 2 before it comes out. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.